Hello and welcome to the fourth presentation in the 19th Annual Caithness International Science Festival. This presentation is our international presentation. It's called Escape to the Moon, and the guest presenter is Digger Carey, who you can see on the screen, who's well known in Caithness. Hi Digger.
Good morning.
Yeah. I'm Ian Bakey. I'm the chair of Science 03, and with me from Science 03 I have our festival administrator, Nicola MacLeod. Hi Nicola. And co-chair tonight is Eleanor Bakey, who will help me with the question and answer. So welcome to our panelists and to Digger in Colorado. Before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. The event has been recorded, however your screens are not. This has been a popular event, so please direct all your questions through the question and answer button that's at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many as we can in the question and answer phase of Dwayne's presentation. As an audience, you have an opportunity to upvote questions. So if you give it the thumbs up, the question becomes more popular, and that's the one that Dwayne will be answering. So give it a thumbs up if it's a good question. So I'd just like to welcome Dwayne. He's well known to Caithness. He's he's been in all of our schools, I think, and certainly a lot of places. So it's an absolute delight to have him back tonight to talk about escaping to the moon. And this is one of two presentations Dwayne will give. He has another one, I think, on the 25th of May at 7 p.m, where he's going to talk about the shared journey into space. I'll confirm that at the end. So Dwayne, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Bakey, for that introduction, and how wonderful it is to see some of my friends again from Caithness. We had planned on coming over here fairly soon, maybe even this year, but obviously, as we all know, it's been kind of a difficult year. So we're going to have some fun this evening talking about escaping to the moon. Now, before we get started, I'd like to thank a few of the just a few of the folks that are responsible for bringing this show to your homes tonight. Let's start out with the Caithness International Science Festival. Some other sponsors are the Scottish Government, the Highland Council, the Robertson Trust, the Beatrice Partnership Fund, KP Technology, and Foundation Scotland. And they are funded by several local foundations, including the RWE Campster Wind Farm Community Fund, the Tannock and District Wind Farm Trust, the Watton Wind Farm Trust, and folks in Caithness, please excuse me for my pronunciation here, but I'm going to try. The RWE Badachow Wind Farm Community Fund. So thanks to all our sponsors, and I know there's many more, but let's get on with the show. Now, as I talked about a little bit earlier, we know that it's been a difficult year. I know I'm speaking to a lot of children this evening that have been locked away from school, and indeed, our children here in the United States have faced the same challenges. And we thought it would be fun to discuss an escape, a way to get away from everything for a while. Why don't we escape to the moon?
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
Now, the last time America went to the moon was about 50 years ago, and we called that the Apollo project or the Apollo program. Well, guess what? Apollo had a twin, and her name was Artemis. And America's new plan to send people to the moon, perhaps in the next 4 years or so, is codenamed Project Artemis. So if we're going to go to the moon, if we're going to escape to the moon, we can use some of these ideas from the Artemis program to help us see how we're going to get to the moon. Now, the first question you have to ask yourself is, why would anyone want to go to the moon? Now, I know I'm talking primarily to primary school age children this evening. And the main reason we would want to go to the moon is because it would be a lot of fun. But you know, it costs a lot of money to go to the moon. So we have to have good reasons to do that. This slide you see on your screen right now discusses some of the reasons that America is addressing on our next program to go back to the moon, Project Artemis. Now, out of these reasons, and these are primarily for adults, but out of these reasons, my favorite two are, number one, I think it would be very inspiring to children all over the world to see human beings back on the moon. And by inspiring, I mean it would encourage them to work harder in school, particularly on their maths and science, so that someday they can be part of the space team. You know, back when I was a child, I can remember being inspired by the Apollo program back in the 1960s when America went to the moon for the first time. And it encouraged me to work harder in school on my maths and sciences. Even though I really didn't like those subjects, I wanted to be part of the space team someday. So it encouraged me to work harder in school. And another important reason to go back to the moon is, as you know, America and other countries are currently exploring the surface of Mars with robotic rovers. And we're looking for signs of life. Next slide, please. We're looking for signs of life. And guess what? If we can find signs of life on Mars, don't you think we'd want to go there really, really bad to check things out for ourselves? But Mars is a long and difficult journey. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at how far it is to get to Mars. First, let's take a look at the distance between the Earth and the moon. We all know that the moon is very far away. In fact, if you were really far out in space and you took a picture of the Earth and the moon, this is what it would look like. Did you know that you would have to travel around the world 10 times in order to go as far as it would take you to go to the moon? So the moon's a long ways away, and in our spaceship, it's going to take us about 3 days to get to the moon. But remember, I was talking about Mars and the possibility of finding life on Mars. And if we find life on Mars or signs of past life, we're going to want to go there really bad. Well, let's look at how far it is to Mars. Next slide, please. Wow. If you guys look really close to the left side of your screen where it says Earth and Moon, you'll see how close the moon is to the Earth compared to how far Mars is away from the Earth. So the moon is a far distance, but Mars is much, much farther. Did you know that if you went to the moon 1,000 times, you would still not have traveled far enough to get to Mars? And even though the trip to the moon only takes 3 days, a trip to Mars is going to take us 9 months. So why am I talking about Mars so much? It's because the fact that we are going to eventually want to go to Mars makes the moon a very, very important place. The moon, it turns out, is a great place for us to practice our skills before we take that long trip to Mars. What would happen if we went to Mars and it took us 9 months to get there? What if we ran into a problem? We ran into some type of situation that we didn't have the skills for or we hadn't practiced for. because of the way Mars moves around the sun and the way Earth moves around the sun, we're probably going to have to stay on Mars after we get there for like 3 or 4 months before we can safely come back to Earth. So if we have a bad problem on Mars, it could be very, very serious, and it would take us a long time to get back to Earth. But on the moon, boys and girls, on the moon, it takes you 3 days to get there. You can get there and you can practice all of your Mars skills. And if you run into a problem, you just jump back into your spaceship, and in 3 days, you're back safe on Earth. You don't even have to wait to come back. You can come back whenever you want. So I think that is a very good reason, besides the fact that being on the moon would be a lot of fun, that is a great reason to want to go to the moon and to practice our skills, because the moon is right there for us to practice, and we can get there quickly and relatively safely. Next slide, please. Now, we've discussed why it's important to go to the moon, actually why adults think it's important. I think me and you would agree that it's just fun to go there. But you know, before you go to the moon, first of all, we got to figure out where we're going to land, okay? Luckily, we have sent some small robotic rovers to the moon to drive around and look for some safe landing spots with interesting things around for us to explore. I think that there's some kids out there this evening that I'm talking to that are interested in robotics. I think there's probably a lot of kids that are interested in robotics. Did you know that the space team needs lots and lots of people who like robotics? Because in the future, before we go to the moon and before we go to Mars and before we go to other places, we're going to use our robots to help us explore those places before we actually go. You know, it takes a lot less money, and it's a lot safer to send robots out to check things out before humans get there. So you guys out there that are interested in robots, boy, you're really needed on the space team. Luckily, we have some robots on the moon roaming around, and they found a safe place for us to land. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've decided we're going to go to the moon, and we know where we're going to land. How are we going to get there? Well, the trip first starts out with a rocket, but not just any rocket. We're talking about a big, powerful, strong rocket, strong enough to send a spaceship and stuff that you're going to need all the way to the moon. We call this the Space Launch System. Next slide, please. Now, I visited a lot of your schools in the past, and we talked about my mission to space on the space shuttle. I'd like you to look at the comparison, the difference between the space shuttle and the Space Launch System, the Power Moon rocket. Look at the difference there. My space shuttle doesn't look very big or strong, does it? It's not very big or strong compared to the rocket that you're going to fly to the moon. Did you know that my spaceship was cool and it was strong, but it can only take me about 600 kilometers into space. 600 kilometers is a long way. It's about the distance from Wick down to the northern border of England. That's about 600 kilometers. And you would have to take that trip about 600 times in order to have traveled far enough to go all the way to the moon. So my spaceship didn't take me very close to the moon, did it? But look at your big, strong spaceship. That one is more powerful, and it can take you all the way to the moon. But I have a question. If you're going to ride on this rocket, where are you going to sit? Next slide, please. This is boys and girls, is what's called an exploded diagram of the rocket. All those parts go together, but in this picture, they've been taken apart slightly so that we can examine the different parts. It's called an exploded diagram. And engineers in the audience and scientists in the audience will be familiar with that term. So I'd like to first direct your attention toward the small part of the rocket that is inside the little yellow rectangle with the yellow arrow pointed at it. That small little part of the rocket is the spaceship. And you can sit about 6 or 7 crew members inside there for the trip to the moon. I would like to point out how gigantic the rocket is, the whole rocket is compared to the tiny little spaceship. This is because Earth's gravity is very, very strong. And it takes a lot of rocket power and it takes a lot of rocket fuel in order to get your spaceship on the way to the moon. Now let's look at the exploded diagram a little bit closer. Can you see that big, long brown component? That is mainly your fuel tank for your rocket fuel. Look at all that rocket fuel. In fact, that rocket fuel takes up a lot more space than your little spaceship does. I'd like to point out the 2 rocket boosters, the white rocket boosters on the sides of the rocket. Those boosters are very, very powerful, and it's a different kind of rocket. And they exist for one reason. They exist to get your big rocket ship off the surface of the Earth and higher and higher and higher, straight up about until you get clear of most of the Earth's atmosphere. You get up to where the air is very, very thin or weak and it doesn't slow you down very much anymore. And then those rocket boosters, those white rocket boosters, they fall off and they fall into the ocean. And the brown part of the rocket and all the other things that are on the top of that continue onto space, except instead of going up, they start to go really, really, really fast, kind of sideways, flying across the surface of the Earth, very high up. And they get going very, very fast so that finally, when you run out of rocket fuel and the main part of the rocket separates from your little spaceship, now you're going so fast that you can't fall back to Earth. So when you're blasting off from Earth, you have to go up and you have to get going really, really fast so that when you're all out of rocket fuel, you don't fall back to Earth. Next slide, please. So now we're blasting off and you can see the big white fire coming from those white rocket boosters that we talked about. And in between the large white fire, you can see 4 smaller rocket engines that use the fuel that's in the brown part. And all those rocket engines together are firing to get you faster and faster and higher and higher. And right now, boys and girls, you're very excited because you're blasting off into space and you're just a wee bit scared because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But guess what? That rocket was built by people on the space team. That rocket was designed by engineers and scientists, but it was actually put together. The solid rocket, the white rockets were put on, and all the pieces were put together by people on the space team that had never gone to university. In other words, speaking to the adults and the teachers in the audience, these were kids that grew up and got a vocational education, and they know how to do things like weld, and they know how to do things like rivet, and they know how to use tools, and they know how to build things and put things together. But they didn't go to university, but they're every bit as smart as the kids that did go to university. The kids that went to university are the ones that design the rocket, but the ones that actually build it are the ones that didn't go to university. So kids from P1 to P7, the ones I'm talking to this evening, if you want to be part of the space team, we need all your different skills. There's some kids that want to be scientists and engineers and doctors and things that require university. And then there's other kids that would like to build things and fix things and repair things and figure out how things work. That's called getting a vocational education. And we need both kinds of kids on the space team, and they have to be the best at what they do, because as you can see, when the rocket's blasting off, there's a lot of fire and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And you're a little bit scared riding that rocket, but you're also very confident that the rocket's going to work the way it's supposed to, because the people that are on the space team are the best at what they do. Next slide, please. So now you blasted off into space and the main rocket has fallen back to Earth, and your spaceship, designated by the yellow arrow, has been in space now for about 3 days, speeding toward the moon. But guess what? Before you get to the moon, there's a special space station that goes around the moon. Most of us know that there's a space station right now up there that goes around and around the Earth. We call it the International Space Station. But America is thinking about building a space station, a smaller one, that goes around the moon. And people could live in that space station. We call that Gateway. Okay, so you've been in space for 3 days and you fly to the Gateway. Now, why would you want to go to the Gateway before you land on the moon? Well, first of all, there's more room inside the Gateway, so you can fly your spaceship up to the Gateway and connect to it, and then get out of your spaceship and get into the Gateway and have some nice sleeping bags to sleep in. You can get a nice warm meal. You can rest up before you take your last final portion of the trip down to the moon. Now, as we look at the Gateway, I would like you guys to notice the green arrow on your screens. That green arrow points to a different kind of spaceship that we call a lunar lander. Your spaceship that you flew from the Earth to the Gateway is called a space capsule, and it's not designed to land on the moon, but your lunar lander is. So you're going to get out of your space capsule and get some rest and get some good food and maybe watch some movies and have some fun with your crew. And then after a day or two of rest, you're going to get inside your lunar lander, and that is the spaceship that will take you to the moon. Next slide. Now, I'd like to take some time here to issue a challenge, and I'm going to call this Digger's Gateway Challenge. Right now in America at NASA, which is our space agency, there's a big argument going on right now. There's a lot of people that say, we don't need a Gateway space station. It's just going to cost us a bunch of extra money, and it's going to take us time to build. And then there's other people that are saying, no, no, no. If we're going to go to the moon and live on the moon, we are going to need a Gateway space station that orbits around the moon. And so it's a big argument right now that NASA's having. And so far, we have not decided if we are really going to have a Gateway space station that goes around the moon. So I would like to issue the Digger Challenge. For you P1 through P7 kids, anybody that's interested, please submit a 3-paragraph essay to the staff at the Caithness International Science Festival. The staff will review your essays. You can send them via email, of course. The staff will review your essays, and then they will send them on to me. And I will decide which P1 essay is the best one, which P2 essay is the best one, and so on through 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I will pick the best essays, and guess what? I will send those on to NASA to help them with their decision. And this is really not that strange of an idea. NASA listens to kids. I know this. They've done it in the past. They listen to kids and they listen to your ideas. So if you're interested in taking Digger's Gateway Challenge, those 3-paragraph essays, send them on to the Science Festival people and they'll forward them to me, and I will pick the best ones and send them to NASA. Does that sound fun? Next slide, please. Okay, so now you've jumped into your lunar lander and you're going to the moon. Well, wait a minute. If you're going to the moon, it would probably be a good idea for you to have some type of a moon rover that you can drive around the surface of the moon to help you explore. Well, guess what? Your friends on the space team have already landed your moon buggy, your moon rover, your moon buggy. They've landed it on the surface of the moon right next to where you're going to land with your lunar lander. So here's what that looks like. But I wonder how that moon buggy is going to get from the top of the lander down to the moon. I wonder how that's going to happen. Let's see how that's going to happen. That is very clever. I wonder who thought of that. I wonder who thought of that. Some very smart team of people on the space team. As you can see, the space team needs all kinds of people with all kinds of skills. Next slide, please. Whoa, so here we are, we've landed, and we're out, we're wearing our spacesuits, and we're exploring the surface of the moon. You know, being on the moon is fun, but boys and girls, we've got a lot of work to do. That's why we're there. We're there to explore and discover and to learn new things and send those all those videos and ideas and stuff back to Earth so the space team can all work together and figure out the skills that we're going to need eventually to go to Mars. But the moon's kind of a funny place to live. Did you know that nighttime on the moon lasts about 14 days? And did you know that when it's nighttime on the moon, it gets very, very cold? Now, I know that you guys, a lot of you guys all live in Caithness, and I've been to Caithness a few times. I know that it gets pretty cold up there. However, the coldest that it's ever gotten in Wick is about 14 degrees below zero. The coldest that it's ever gotten on planet Earth is down around the South Pole, and that's got down to about 100 degrees below zero. But see that picture, see that image on your screen right now? When it's nighttime on the moon and you're out there working on the moon, it's 170 degrees below zero. Are you afraid that you're going to freeze? Well, don't be afraid, because your friends on the space team have built these wonderful spacesuits that can help you stay warm during those cold, cold nights on the moon. And not only that, boys and girls, but on the moon, we don't have any air. So those spacesuits have oxygen inside them so we can breathe. And they help keep us safe and comfortable when we're on the moon. And thank goodness we have really hardworking people and smart people on the space team that built those spacesuits for us. Next slide, please. So that's what it's like during the night on the moon. So you've been on the moon about a week, and nighttime finished, and now you get to the daytime portion of your existence on the moon. Daytime, daylight lasts about 2 weeks when you're on the moon. And being in the moon during the daylight, it's easier to work because you don't need lights and stuff like that. But guess what, boys and girls? It gets really, really hot during the daytime on the moon. Now, I know that it doesn't get real hot in Caithness. As a matter of fact, the hottest it's ever gotten in Wick is about 26 degrees. But if you went to the desert like Death Valley in America or the Sahara Desert or one of those really hot deserts on Earth, about the hottest it's ever gotten there is around 57 degrees. However, on the moon during the daytime, get ready for this, it gets to 130 degrees above zero. If you were boiling a kettle on the stove for some tea and the water was boiling inside, that water's super hot, but that water's not as hot as it is on the moon. Don't you think you would burn up inside that suit? Well, you're not going to, because your clever friends on the space team, that same suit that kept you warm during the nighttime now keeps you cool during the daytime. It's a super cool suit, and it's very difficult to design and build, but your friends on the space team, we all work together as a team on the space team, and they have worked together to provide you these wonderful moonwalking suits. Now, before we go further, let's talk about what I think is the super coolest part about being on the moon. Did you know that when you're on the moon during your moon mission, did you know that you have superhuman powers? You have superhuman powers, especially when it comes to lifting things and picking things up. Next slide, please. Boys and girls, I would like to introduce you to a friend of mine. Her name is Mary Puppins, and she lives just down the street from me. And I know her family, and Mary is a Cocker Spaniel. I know that some of you have Cocker Spaniels, or perhaps have some friends or know some people with Cocker Spaniels. We know that a Cocker Spaniel is a great dog, but they're not really big and they're not very heavy. The other day I was out for a walk and I saw Mary Puppins, and little girl that lives with her is in P2. And Mary Puppins is kind of a different kind of dog. She likes to be picked up. Most times you don't want to pick up dogs, but Mary Puppins likes to be picked up and held. And the little girl, her name was Fiona, she went over and picked up Mary Puppins and she was holding her in her arms. And I said, wow, Fiona, isn't Mary very heavy? And she says, no, she's not heavy. I can pick her up easy. Well, Fiona's brother walked out. His name was Robert. And I said, Fiona, do you think you could pick Robert up? Well, Robert is in P7. Okay, he's a bigger kid. He's in P7. And Mary looked at Robert and she says, I can't pick him up. He's too heavy. And I said, well, guess what, Fiona? If you were on the moon, you could pick up Robert and hold him in your arms just as easily as you are holding Mary Puppins in your arms right now. And her eyes got big and she said, wow, why is that? And I said, because on Earth, the gravity is very strong, but on the moon, the gravity is very weak. Mary Puppins weighs about 7 kilograms. Her brother Robert weighs about 42 kilograms, but on the moon, Robert would feel as heavy as Mary Puppins does here on Earth. So guess what? When you're on the moon, you've got superpowers. Next slide, please. Okay, now you're on the moon. And boys and girls, we've talked about the space team and all the important things that the space team does. You're on the moon and you've got a lot of work to do. You have to figure out where the ice is buried. Did you know that we're pretty sure that there's ice buried on the moon, water ice? And we know that if we take this ice out and we melt it, then we have water to drink while we're on the moon. And not only that, boys and girls, but we know that if we do special things to the water, we can turn water into rocket fuel that can help us blast off and go back to Earth. So we have to learn ways to find the ice and dig it out. We have to find ways to turn it into rocket fuel. We have to find ways to store that rocket fuel. We have a lot of problems to solve if we're going to be on the moon. We need supercomputers that can help our spaceships land exactly where we want them to land. We have to learn how to build houses and habitats on the moon. How are we going to do that? Using moon rocks and things like that to help us build these habitats and places to live. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to figure it out because we're going to have thousands, tens of thousands of people on the space team with all kinds of skills. And not only scientists and engineers, or doctors, or lawyers, or nurses, and all those types of skills, but different skills on the space team. We're going to need musicians, and we're going to need artists, and we're going to need dancers. We're going to need cooks, and we're going to need janitors, and we're going to need joiners, and we're going to need all different kinds of skills on the space team. But there's one thing we can all do in primary school to help us get ready to be on the space team, whether we want to be an astronaut or an engineer or a musician or a scientist. There's one thing we can all do in primary school, boys and girls, and that's to work double hard on our maths. Double hard on our maths. Now, you might think that if you're going to be a dancer, that you don't need to know a lot about maths, but maths is magic. You know why? It's because when you work double hard on maths, you turn your brain into a lean, mean learning machine. And then you can learn dancing easier, or you can learn your sciences easier, and you can learn your engineering easier. You can learn how to build that rocket easier because you've taught your brain how to learn new things and learn them quickly. And that's why we do the maths. And that's why we struggle hard at it and we work hard at it to turn this into a great learning machine. Now, before we go into questions, I'd like to mention one other thing. Remember that long trip to Mars I talked about? Takes 9 months to get to Mars. Did you know it's going to take a very special kind of astronaut to go to Mars? It's going to take the kind of astronaut who is not afraid of getting into a small spaceship with perhaps 6 other crewmates, 6 other friends, and being alone for 9 months on the trip to Mars. I would like, boys and girls, I would like you to think back over this last year during the pandemic. You've been locked into your houses a lot, haven't you? You've been locked in with your family or perhaps a small group of friends. You know, you've gotten very used to being around just a small group of people for a long period of time. That gives you great practice for that trip to Mars. And later on, when you turn into adults and NASA and other space agencies are looking for volunteers to go to Mars, and if you want to go to Mars, you can raise your hand to the bosses and say, hey, you want me to be on that mission because I've already practiced social distancing. I've been through the pandemic and I know how to do that. And it wasn't much fun, but I know I can do it. And that would make you a very interesting candidate to go to Mars. So boys and girls, I know this last year has been difficult. It's been difficult for everybody, even old people. But there's some very valuable lessons we've learned from that. And it will make us better and stronger as we go forward into the future, because we are working our way out of the pandemic. It won't be long and we'll be able to get together with our friends and not have to worry about wearing masks and things like that. We are working toward that. So we're almost there and we can keep going. And with that enlightening note, I hope, next slide, please. I am really looking forward to hearing the kinds of questions I am going to get from the kids of Caithness.
Thanks, Dwayne. That was a great talk, and we've got a lot of questions. So here's an invite to anybody else that would like to ask questions. If you send them in, we'll treat them. But I've got one question for Dwayne to begin with. Could you please repeat Digger's Gateway Challenge?
The Gateway Challenge, boys and girls, we talked about the Gateway space station that goes around the moon. That hasn't been built yet. And it's going to take a lot of money to build that, and it's going to take a lot of time. And we're having an argument right now in the United States about whether we really need that Gateway space station or not. Remember that the ultimate goal is to get people living on the surface of the moon for months at a time. There's some people that are saying that if we're going to do that, we need a Gateway space station that orbits very close to the moon that we can get to from the moon in just a matter of perhaps, a matter of 1 or 2 hours, we can get to the gateway, because it takes 3 days to get to all the way back to Earth when you're on the moon, but the gateway, it might just take a couple hours to get there. And then there's other people saying that we don't need a gateway, that we can launch from the Earth and then transfer to a lunar lander and go to the moon and do our mission perfectly fine without the gateway. So that's the argument we're having. And I would just wonder if there's any kids out there that have any ideas about whether we need the gateway or if we don't need the gateway. And what I'd like to see, if you're interested in participating in Digger's Gateway Challenge, is a 3-paragraph essay that explains to me or to NASA why or why not we need a gateway space station that orbits around the moon. Ian, does that clear that up?
Thanks, Vicky. So to anybody wishing to enter that, 3 paragraphs, if we need or don't need gateway, and the email address would be festival at, forgive me, the email address is hello, HELLO, at science03.org. So if you write your 3 paragraphs to hello at science03.org, we'll have a look at them and we'll forward the best ones to Dwayne, our digger, and then he'll choose what the winner is. How about that? Okay, so if I could move on to question and answers now. Number 1 was from Andrew Clark. Andrew's asking, how do you cook food in space?
Can you cook food in space? Was that
how
do you cook food in space?
Yes.
And that's from Andrew.
Yes.
Andrew, thanks for that question. During my time, when I flew on the space shuttle, I mean, you might naturally think that we might carry prepared foods and then just pop them in the microwave and warm them up. But the space shuttle didn't have a microwave oven. So what we used was they were like military rations. In the States, we call them MREs. But in the military, we keep our food in plastic pouches, you know, when we're out in the field and stuff like that. And especially prepared food that does not need to be refrigerated, like for instance, if you can think of a porridge or something like that inside a pouch. And then when it came time to eat it, we would put the pouch inside a small oven, a convection oven that we had on board the space shuttle, and we would warm it up for several minutes and then open it up and eat it. And there were other foods that we had, like camping food, dehydrated type food, where you add water to it, you open up the bag and you add water and you let it, you know, hydrate for a little bit, and then you can eat that. The space station, I believe, does have a refrigerator, but you know, in order to go to the moon, in order to have people living on the moon for several months at a time, I think that it would be quite beneficial for people that are living on the moon, to perhaps have more conventional ways to cook food and make the food seem a lot more like food is on Earth while you're living on the moon. That is a challenge for the space team. One thing I forgot to mention is the space team needs lots and lots of chefs. And the space team needs lots and lots of nutritional scientists, because food is a big, big deal for people that are going to be living on the moon, and then later on going to be living on Mars. Food is a big, big deal. So there's room for chefs, nutritional scientists, those types of things on the space team. There's room for everybody on the space team. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Dwayne. The next question is from Daniela Kupsa, and it is, does the moon rover run out of fuel?
Does the moon rover run out of fuel? Does the moon rover run out of fuel? What a fascinating question, Daniela? What a fascinating question. Now, if the moon buggy that you drive around in had conventional fuel, perhaps there was a fuel cell and it used hydrogen or something like that, yeah, it would eventually run out of fuel. But as you're probably aware, what we're working on, one thing we're working on here on Earth is electric cars, cars that have batteries in them and they run off of electricity. Now, did I mention that daytime on the moon lasted 2 weeks? And that solar power, solar panels are a great way for us to create electricity when we're on the moon. So I predict that our moon buggies that we drive around on are going to be powered by batteries, by electrical batteries that power motors and then drive the wheels. And those batteries will be recharged by solar panels. But we're going to have to work on our battery technology because during the nighttime, that last 2 weeks, we're going to have our batteries charged up enough to last those 2 weeks. Boy, it sounds like we need lots and lots of battery scientists and battery engineers on the space team. Great question. Next one, please.
Thanks, Dwayne. From LKM Martin, what are space rockets made of?
What are space rockets made of?
What are space rockets made of? You know, space rockets can be made of all kinds of things, but right now we use a lot of aluminum. And for the fuel tanks, there's another kind of special material called lithium. And you can learn about this by looking on the internet, talking to your teachers, that we mix with the aluminum to make it even lighter. We use a lot of aluminum. SpaceX here in the United States is working on a spaceship that they say that will go to Mars. It actually has an exterior skin made out of stainless steel. So there's lots of different things that rockets can be made out of. And guess what? There's all kinds of new ideas that we have to test out. So just the fact that you asked me that question makes me think that you might be interested in being a rocket scientist. And of course, the space team needs a lot of those. So work double hard on your maths, okay, and become a great rocket scientist, and then you can be on that space team. Great question.
Thanks, Digger. The next one is, how much does a space suit cost to make?
How much does a spacesuit cost to make? I have no idea, but let me tell you a little secret about NASA, at least the NASA that I was working for when I was there about 20 years ago. NASA is great at designing and building lots of really cool stuff. Back in those days, NASA was not very great at keeping track of how much things actually cost. So for many, many things in the space program, we didn't have a great idea how much it costs. However, one cool thing that's happening with NASA right now and in America is we've got private companies, private companies like companies that aren't government, but they're private companies that are building their own spaceships and spacesuits and things like that. And those private companies know exactly what a spacesuit costs to build, but I don't think they really let the rest of us know. So in short, I don't know how much a spacesuit costs. I know it's very expensive, and what we need to work on is to make it cheaper. And that's where the clever people in the space team can do a lot more work, is to make those suits safer and cheaper, especially the gloves. Questions?
Thanks, Dwayne. The next one is from Andrew Piper and Casey Clark. They would like to know what happens if you need to go to the toilet, when you're out of the lander. Now, before you answer the question, can I use it to plug that the online session on Saturday, the 13th at 11 o'clock is How to Make a Perfect Poo by Aberdeen Science Centre. But I'll hand it over to Dwayne now. How do you go to the toilet when out of the lander?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can answer that one, actually. I know exactly what you're going to have to do. The question assumes that you've made it all the way to the moon, and you flew to the moon in your lander and you've landed on the moon. Now it's time to do some exploration. It's time to get out of the lander with your spacesuit on. And it's time to jump in that moon buggy and drive around and find out where all the ice is and the other cool stuff. And now you have to go to the bathroom. you're wearing a nappy. You're wearing a nappy inside your spacesuit. And whether you have to do the easy bathroom task, or actually you don't want to do the hard bathroom task inside that spacesuit. So astronauts actually pay special attention to their diet so that they know that they're not going to have to poo when they're outside wearing their spacesuit. But they are going to have to pee. You know, it's important to keep drinking a lot of water when you're working. And then they use a nappy to do that, a very kind of a large adult size, kind of a powerful, strong, absorbent nappy. But that's what we use. Now, if you could ever think of a better way to solve that problem, NASA would be very, very, very interested. Next question.
The next question is from James Forbes. James is 7 years old, and he says, why does the moon get so hot during its day?
Thanks, James, for that question. Why does the moon get so hot during the day? Well, it gets hot from the sun. Now, the reason the Earth doesn't get that hot from the sun is that the Earth has a lot of air, and the air goes up very, very high, and the air protects us from the heat of the sun. But if you don't have any air to protect you from the sun, it gets very, very hot at the distance that the Earth and the moon are from the sun. Now, you know, the problem of getting very, very hot is not going to be a big issue when we go to Mars, because Mars is much farther from the sun than is the Earth and the moon. And so when you're on Mars, the sun doesn't feel quite so powerful and it's not quite so hot. But Earth is actually quite close to the sun. And you know what? This is kind of a scary thought. But were it not for the air that's around our Earth would get very, very hot like the moon does, but our air protects us. And you know, we should all be very thankful that we have a wonderful planet to live on, planet Earth. And we should all take very, very, very good care of our Earth. Great question.
Thanks, Dwayne. Steve Walker would like to know, is it possible to have a space elevator from the moon so you didn't have to land and take off? So is there possible to make a space elevator for the moon?
If you're talking about a space elevator that starts at the moon and then goes up to a certain height, let's say as high as where the Gateway station would be, that's quite a difficult engineering problem, but I believe with proper materials, it is feasible to do that. It's really not feasible or possible in most senses of the word to have an elevator that goes all the way from the Earth to the moon. However, there have been some really smart people that have considered a way to build a space elevator on the surface of the Earth that takes you high enough to get you outside most of the Earth's atmosphere. And then from that point, it becomes much easier to achieve orbit around the Earth. The main thing that's keeping us from building a space elevator at this point is that we do not currently have materials that are strong enough to build that space elevator. But you know, if you're interested in going into chemical engineering, going into mechanical engineering at university, these are the types of problems that we're working on solving right now. We're working on coming up with super materials that have the strengths and the lightness required in order to build a space elevator off the surface of the Earth. And I've never thought about a space elevator that originates on the moon, but those engineering problems would be much easier than the problems faced when you build a space elevator that originates on the Earth. One big challenge about building things on the moon is we're going to need to get very, very smart about using materials that are on the moon to build our structures so that we don't have to bring in things from Earth. We can use what's already on the moon. We call that using in situ resources. Luckily for us, the moon, it turns out, has a lot of aluminum on it. So that's a great, that'd be a great starting point for questions like that. Fascinating, fascinating questions, Ian.
Thanks, Dwayne. I'm going to combine two questions. One is from Gemma, who's asking, how long does it take to build a rocket? And Nebby would like to know, over time, if space rockets improve, will the time to get to Mars be quicker? So one is, how long does it take to build a rocket, from Gemma, and how can we make better rockets, from Nebby?
Great question. I will attempt to answer these two questions fairly quickly. First of all, how long does it take to build a rocket? There is no answer to that. I talked about an initiative in the United States right now in order to, what NASA is doing is they're using more commercial private companies to build rockets and spaceships and things like that. What we have discovered, and it's no surprise to me, being a big believer in American capitalism, it's no surprise to me that private companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, I'm leaving out some, Sierra Nevada, those types of companies, turns out they can build rockets a lot faster than NASA has. NASA's been working for over 10 years on the Space Launch System, the big rocket that I showed during my slideshow, and it still hasn't flown yet. Whereas SpaceX and other companies are building rockets in a fraction of that time. So there's really no answer there. Now, the question about going to Mars, I talked about the Mars trip taking 9 months. It'll take 9 months if we are limited in our fuel that we can take with us in our rockets. But boys and girls, if we get to the point where we get smart enough to go to Mars and to build small propellant production factories, Mars has a lot of carbon dioxide. And when you have carbon dioxide, you've got oxygen and you've got carbon. And if you can figure out a way to get hydrogen in there, and I haven't really researched this recently, now you can make rocket fuel. If we can get to the point, boys and girls, where we can blast off to Mars, and when we land on Mars, we have tanks full of rocket fuel waiting for us for our trip back to Earth, then we can build rockets that we don't have to worry about saving fuel to come back to Earth, because we can just fill up our tanks when we get to Mars. And boys and girls, when you can do that, you might be able to shorten that Mars trip to 6 months or perhaps even shorter. Yes, it is possible to do all these things. Possible, but not yet feasible. The difference between something being possible and actually happening is work that's performed by the space team. Boys and girls, I've told you many times, we need all kinds of kids for the space team. Dr. Bakey, Mr. Ian, and I have talked about this many times. Miss Cheryl and I have been to Caithness many times over the years. I know that the kids in Caithness are a special brand of kids. And what we need is we need kids from Caithness to be part of that space team. And we need your great ideas and your creativity to help us solve these problems.
Heidegger, it's near the hour. Can I take a couple more questions, or would you like to stop?
Ian, I'm having such a good time.
Right.
And I'm imagining all these wonderful kids that are listening up there in Caithness. I'll keep going as long as you want me to go.
Right. We'll take a few more if that's okay with Nicola. Can I get the thumbs up from Nicola? We're good. Neil has got two questions here. They're quite interesting ones. This week, Russia and China announced a collaboration in constructing a gateway station. Could this persuade NASA to get involved? And his other question was, can more solid rocket boosters be used to achieve escape velocities rather than 4 times RS-25 rocket engines? So will NASA take part with a gateway with other nations, and can more RSBs be used?
Yeah, this is those are both wonderful questions. The first one is something that I apologize. I think some of the younger children listening in won't be able to quite understand. You know, we can talk about science and we can talk about engineering, but when we talk about politics, it gets a lot more complicated. Something that's been happening in the United States for at least the last couple of decades is a reluctance for uh, um, for our government to allow American engineering firms, whether it be NASA or private companies, to work in concert with the Chinese. I think a lot of kids out there know that currently America and Russia work together quite closely on the International Space Station, but the Chinese are not part of that cooperation. And it's due to laws that were passed by our Congress many, many years ago that forbids us to work closely with the Chinese government when it comes to complex engineering problems. I think this is a big, big mistake, okay? One of the interesting perspectives I have as an astronaut, there haven't been that many of us that have flown off the surface of the Earth and seen what our beautiful Earth looks like from space. But I understand, and so do the other astronauts who have flown in space, I understand that we have a lot more in common on this Earth as people than the things that divide us. We have so much in common. And I think America is making a big, big mistake by not being more aggressive about working together with the Chinese. The question mentioned a partnership between the Russians and the Chinese to go to the moon and to do research and perhaps a gateway station and those types of things. It breaks my heart to think that America can't be part of that team. But right now with our laws, we just can't. And sometimes the way that politicians think here in America, sometimes they think in terms of competition with China or competition with Russia. And I would much rather see the human species all cooperating in this quest to get humans off the surface of the Earth and living in various places in the solar system. I understand this puts me in the minority, and it actually may sound like a strange idea, but that's the difference in perspective you get after you've flown in space, and most of my fellow astronauts would agree. Now, the second question having to do with solid rocket boosters being able to achieve the velocities needed in order to leave the orbit of the Earth and then go to the moon, what we refer to as escape velocity. Yes, that's very, very possible. However, there's one thing about solid rockets. So far with our technology with solid rockets, once we light them, we don't have any way to stop them until they run out of fuel. We don't have any way to stop them and restart them again. Typically, what happens during a space mission where you're going from the Earth to the moon is first you achieve Earth orbit, and then you check out your systems, and then you do one more rocket burn that sends you on your way to the moon. And with our solid rocket technology, once those things light, they keep burning and burning and burning. And I suppose it's theoretically possible to use solid rockets to get you all the way on your way to the moon, but there's really no reason to do that. And I think your safety margins and those types of things would be very, very decreased as opposed to using the liquid fueled engines, the 4 shuttle derived engines that you spoke of in your question. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Dwayne. Dwayne, I'm for the audience, I'm going to try to prioritize questions that I think came from younger members, because Dwayne has a second talk and it's a longer talk, it's 1 hour plus. So you can certainly ask questions again at the second talk on Thursday, the 25th of March. So from Amy, Dwayne, how many people have been to the moon?
I know that one. How many people have been in the moon? There have been 12 people that actually have been on the surface of the moon. There's very few of them that are still alive. The last time it happened was in 1972, you guys, 1972. That was the last time. I was in 10th grade. I was in, what would this be? Oh boy, this would be like maybe S4. That's the grade I was in whenever the last time it was that people walked on the moon. Now, I harbor a private desire. I hope that we get people back on the moon before the last moonwalker that's alive passes on. I think it would be very sad to think that humanity one time had 12 people that walked on the moon, all being alive, and then they all pass before the next person walks on the moon. Now, the next person to walk on the moon is probably going to be, let's say 6 to 8 years from now, it would be my guess. We're not really sure yet. But did you know that the next person on the moon, I really believe, is going to be a woman? The next person on the moon is going to be a woman. That's my prediction.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. Another one is, how many gallons of rocket fuel does it take to fill the fuel tank?
How many? You know why Ian's laughing? It's a private joke we have concerning what we call math in public. Let me just say, when we were talking about the Space Launch System, when we were looking at that big, gigantical brown fuel tank for the rocket fuel, it's liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. It's hundreds of thousands of gallons, which would be, maybe 4 times hundreds of thousands of liters of rocket fuel. And for the Space Launch System, I don't know the number of gallons. In the aviation world, whether it be airplanes or whether it be rockets, we don't really measure liquid fuel like you do when you measure gasoline that goes into your mom's or your dad's gas tank. You measure that in liters, and we measure it in gallons. When you're talking about spaceships, when you're talking about airplanes, we talk about pounds. And I do know the SLS, it's over 1 million pounds of rocket fuel in that gigantic tank. That's a lot of fuel.
That is a lot, Dwayne. I'm going to do 2 more questions and then stop. And the questions are from Brenda and from Lindsay. Brenda is asking, she's saying, Christopher and Ruben ask, what is solar and electrical propulsion? How does it work? What's it for?
That is a great question, Ian. And I'm actually caught here in a mistake in my presentation, because this person that asked the question actually noticed on one of my slides there was something that had to do with solar electric propulsion. I didn't quite get to that because I felt I was running out of time. Now, the reason that's on the slide is when you get a little bit older and you start to study satellites and how satellites go around the Earth and how satellites go around the moon, something that's important to satellites is something that we call station keeping. And oftentimes when a satellite has been in space for a long time and it's going around and around the Earth, or it's going around and around the moon, sometimes we find it necessary to move that satellite around a little bit. And in order to move it, we have to have some type of rocket that moves it around, okay? And there's various ways we can power those rockets. We can have fuel on board the satellite, or we can actually provide that power that we need to move things around from the energy that comes from the sun, or maybe even what we call solar wind, or just forces that come from the sun. And that makes it a lot cheaper and easier to move those satellites around, but the technology is very, very complicated, and we're working on it now. That's another reason we need Caithness kids on the space team. And once we figure out how to use the sun in order to power satellites when they want to move around, that's going to make things a lot easier and a lot cheaper and just better for space exploration. Whoever asked that question is paying very close attention. I love that. What was the second question, Ian?
The last one tonight is from Lindsay MacDonald. How are NASA going to build houses on the moon?
Oh, great question. How is NASA going to build houses on the moon? Do you guys remember when I was talking about the space team? And I was talking about all kinds of people we're going to need on the space team. And I mentioned joiners, didn't I? we're going to need joiners on the space team. We are going to need kids that can figure out how to take moon dust and compact it and turn it into bricks. Did you know that on Earth, when you dig down, you dig into the dirt, right? On the moon, we don't call it dirt. We call it lunar regolith. That is moon soil. And we have to figure out ways, boys and girls, to dig into that moon soil. And it's kind of like sand. And we got to figure out ways to pack it together and turn it into bricks. And then we can use those bricks to build our houses on the moon. And I would like to ask you a question before I go away. Why are we interested in building bricks on the moon and not just bring all the bricks we need from Earth? There's a very good reason why we're interested in building our own bricks on the moon. And I think these future, Dr. Bakey, I think these future these space team members out there in the audience can probably figure out why we would much rather build our own bricks on the moon to build houses as opposed to bringing in all those bricks from Earth.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thank you. That was a great talk, and thank you for taking the courtesy of answering the questions and answers so well. That's over 30 minutes, so thanks for your time. So I'm going to, I've got one quick question. Has it been around all these rocket engines that makes it difficult to hear now?
You know, Ian, you and I have known each other for a long time. When we first met, I had a little hard time hearing and understanding the kids when I went to the schools up there. And then, you know, one time I showed up, I came across and I had hearing aids, and that's really helped me out. My ears have been primarily damaged due to my years and years of flying military fighter jets in the Air Force. And I must confess, as you know, boys and girls, I didn't take very good care of my ears when I was young. And I thought I could tolerate loud noises and never have any problems. But now I'm 63 years old, and I am not very happy about how 25-year-old Digger treated his ears, because now 63-year-old Digger has a hard time hearing stuff. So that's another thing. You guys, you're young, your bodies are strong, your ears are strong, your eyes are strong, your muscles are strong. Please take good care of yourselves and keep yourselves in good shape. And then you'll be better members of the space team. You'll be able to hear the things that I can't hear.
So is it, Dwayne, is it true to say that you didn't listen to Cheryl then?
You know, Ian, real quick, you know, just between us girls here, as soon as we sign off and we're done with our debrief, the hearing aids come out.
Yeah,
and then
there might be a strategic reason for that. So Dwayne, thank you for presenting again. And I'll plug that your next talk is on the 25th, Thursday, the 25th of March at 7 o'clock. And you're going to talk about your shared journey into space, and Cheryl is going to take part as well. So that's really nice. If I may, for our current audience, we've got a talk on Friday on the 12th at 7 o'clock. And Michael Sims is going to talk about hunting for an impact crater in Scotland. And as I said before, on Saturday at 11, we've got the Aberdeen Science Centre, how to make a perfect poo. They might be testing space suits as well, I don't know. Anyway, thank you all for attending. All our events are on science03.org. And from all our panel and Dwayne, good night. Good night.